Welcome to McGonigal's Chronicles, Making Montana Connections. I'm KRTV KXLH anchor Tim McGonigal. The Black Eagle Brewery near Great Falls is one of more than 90 breweries in Montana. Pictures on the walls here tell the story of how the Big Stack helped form the fabric of this area, and beers on tap like Smelterman Blonde pay homage to the workers who built the community. When it comes to the history of Montana, the brewing of beer is a tradition as old as Big Sky Country itself, a history lining the pages of a new book by Missoula author Ryan Newhouse. Recently, I had a chance to talk to him about his in-depth look into the Treasure State's beloved beverages. He discussed some of the innovative marketing techniques brewers use to peddle their products, the difficulties for brewers brought on by prohibition, and more. I hope you enjoy this conversation with Ryan Newhouse. Well, Ryan Newhouse, thank you so much for joining us today, and we're going to be talking about your latest book. It's called Brewing in Montana, but before we do that, tell me a little bit about yourself, your background, and just what's the Ryan Newhouse abbreviated version story, I guess.
Oh, well, thank you, Tim. I appreciate that. I have been in Montana now for just over 20 years, and I came out once to visit and volunteer in Yellowstone National Park. Kind of spent a summer before I graduated college exploring various national parks, including Yellowstone and the Tetons. And I was going to school back in Tennessee, which is where my family's from. And I had just decided that summer that Montana was the place to be. So I ended up graduating and then working on getting into graduate schools. And what I say is, luckily, I didn't get into any of them. So even though I had looked hard at University of Montana in Missoula, so I decided I would get to pick where I wanted to live. And I moved to Missoula, having never seen that city. I spent a year kind of getting some residency, and applied the next year and got into graduate school. And since then, I've never really had a reason to leave, and set down roots and had kids. And all along the way, beer has been part of that story for me. I've been a writer for just as long, for 20 years, and kind of got invited to write about local places to eat and drink for some regional and national magazines. And of course, in doing that, got to meet several of the local breweries that we had around the state. And once I started writing about beer and meeting the people who were making it, and of course, meeting the people who were drinking it, became lifelong friends with a lot of people. And the beer has just always been with me, and something that I've been happy and pretty blessed to promote and discuss and learn about the history and learn about what's going on even today.
Yeah, beer is a part of Montana history, and it's a part of Montana's past, present, and probably will be a part of its future too, because breweries keep popping up. Seems like every week, maybe even every day. I don't know. I mean, there's some of the weirdest places. No, I shouldn't say weirdest places, but some of the places you would probably not think would have a brewery have breweries in Montana.
Absolutely. And that's always been the case. You know, we really do have 150 plus year brewing history, and breweries were one of the first buildings constructed in any new place that might have had a mining claim or, a new stop along the railroad. That and maybe the church were the first two buildings constructed in any township that we may still have today, or many little towns that unfortunately we don't have anymore. But there's always been artifacts and remnants and histories of little breweries in those sort of small, quaint places.
Yeah. So the new book is called Brewing in Montana, and I had a chance to look through it, and very interesting, especially a lot of photographs. And it's not only, to me, what struck me, not only about the beer and the beer history of Montana, but you can also learn about history besides beer in Montana. There's some important things and some facts that people maybe did not know in there.
Absolutely. And I'd have to say that this book would not even be possible without the continued work from Steve Lozar in Lozar's Montana Brewery Museum. And he's up in Polson. He has a great museum that's usually available by appointment. And I got to spend a lot of time up there, which is where a lot of these images came from, and learn and research with him by my side to learn about these stories. And what is so amazing is one of the most impressive things about the Montana brewing history is all of the brewery memorabilia, the breweryana, the advertising, and the ways that breweries advertise their beers and their products and their breweries over the decades and century. And that was the neatest part, to find everything from, a comb that you would, brush your hair with, to all kinds of napkins or various signages that were just showed the ingenuity and the creativity that these brewers had. And that to me is the neatest thing. And Montana can trace its history back, so many years, but we've got cool ties to national and renowned breweries even today. A lot of brewers that started, big names, Lairkind and the such, that just moved once they started a brewery in Montana. They might have gone on and founded some bigger breweries like Olympia. We have, and Montana has brewing ties to Pabst Blue Ribbon, even. So it's kind of neat to see Montana as part of the thread work to today's national beer scene as well.
One of the things I thought was interesting in reading about the in the Great Falls section of the book, there was a picture of a small brush, and then when you explain the picture, it's the little brushes that baseball umpires use to dust off the plate, and it had the was it the Great Falls Select logo?
That one may have been. I was looking at that Volk.
Volk, okay.
Was the first brewery probably to pay taxes in the Great Falls area. So that's one of the oldest in that Great Falls area, and it's at a little brush, and it's amazing that we even still have this type of artifact. And it was for the umpires to sweep the plates clean, and they get dusted up from batters there or people coming in sliding into home. But there it was, just a little touch of brewing advertising for Volk.
It's amazing, like you said, all the different things. There were matchbook covers, there were all kinds of things. I wonder sometimes in reading your book how these had we had social media back then, these guys would have had a field day, I think.
Absolutely. One of my favorite stories is not even a piece of actual advertising, but Missoula Brewing Company, which created Highlander beer, and which Missoula Brewing Company lasted in Missoula until 1964, and even into the 60s. And this story was passed on to me from Steve Lozar, but the brewery ran an advertising campaign via the radio. So we're talking about social media. It was always the radio, and everybody listened to it. And they ran a campaign where they would use a phone book and call the brewery, or the radio station would call random listeners. And if of course, we didn't have caller ID back in the 50s and 60s, but if a person answered their telephone saying, "Hi, Highlander, hi," they would actually win a case of beer or such. Wow. Like, they would win free beer. And so Steve was passing along the information that his own mother, to this day, or when she was around, she'd still answer the phone no matter who called. "Hi, Highlander, hi." And it was just an impactful sort of way. So I guess that's maybe one of the early things going viral. That was a campaign that stuck in people's head to this day.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned Steve Lozar. Is he affiliated with I think it's called the Glacier Brewing Company in Polson?
He does not have any ownership of that company, but he's partnered with them there. He is on the board for the Montana State Historical Society.
Okay.
So he's done a lot of work and a lot of talks there. But yeah, that brewery there, which has a long history, is owned separately, and for the longest time, it's not there anymore, unfortunately. But they had the sign is not there. They had a replica that hung over the Glacier Brewing Company entryway, that was a replica of the original H.S. Gilbert Brewery, which was the state's first legal brewery. And it was just a neat piece of history there. But yeah, Steve's museum is in Polson.
Sure. Okay.
And it's just an incredible place.
Yeah, I've been to the Glacier Brewing Company a couple of times and really enjoy it. And in the book, you talk about they have a lot of historical pictures, and it's kind of like a trip back in time for Montana's history of beer too. So people get to Polson. It's great.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And you're right on the way. You could see all kinds of breweries within, an easy drive of there. But Glaciers is stunning, and they have a lot of history there on those walls.
Yeah. Um, you know, also, and this is not your first Montana beer book. I think you wrote another
Yeah.
book called a guy, Montana Beer, a guide to breweries in Big Sky Country. Tell us what that one's about.
Oh, that was such a fun project to write. And then that one's a little dated. In fact, I joke around that it was probably out of date by the time it went to publishing because, as you and I were just talking about, breweries seem to pop up overnight,
Right.
or can be. So I got invited to profile all the breweries that were open at that time, about 2014. And I think in that book, there were about 30 something, 36 breweries. Although today we have 92 in operation in the state right now. And that was just a great project because I got to, either sit down for most of them or go to the brewery or talk to the owners and ask them that question, like, why a brewery? Like, what made you want to open a brewery? And the stories range. They range from, like, I've been a home brewer and all my friends like my beer, to just, well, wanting a place to have for their community in which they were born and raised, to say, I want a meeting place. I want a place for all of my community to come and enjoy and discuss and have a good beer. So that was a really fun project to get to know the histories of which breweries were in operation at the time, and I'm happy to say that most of those are still in operation and thriving. We lost a few along the way, unfortunately,
Mhm.
but that happens. But that was a really cool project, and opened the door for me to start work on this more historical book, which is talking about all the breweries that once were and are no longer. So it covers basically the current book is like 1860s till, again, those last two breweries closed in 64 and 68, 1964 and 1968. And so we get to see what the foundation of Montana brewing history was.
Yeah, and in your study of the brewing history, what kind of a role, impact, I guess, did prohibition play in Montana
Oh,
brewing
a
history?
substantial one.
Yeah.
It really did. It was a major shift in our own history. It was, as it was nationally and even internationally. A lot of the breweries that we had, we lost. And in fact, according to Steve Lozor's research, he's tracked down 197 breweries that Montana had at one time that are no longer in existence. So, nearly 200 have gone by the wayside. But prohibition was, it was substantial. Those breweries that could maybe shift and make, non-alcoholic soda drinks, or be able to, like, can or bottle, even at that time, mostly bottling, they had a fair shot at surviving. I would imagine that there's a few that still sort of did things in the in the back room and
Right.
probably illegally. But unfortunately, that prohibition set it up where, once it was repealed, those larger breweries that could have withstood that long time away from making beer still had a production line, so they could bring back beer pretty quickly and get it distributed, which was unfortunately not the case for a lot of the smallest breweries that we had in operation at the time. They couldn't package anything, and they couldn't make the product that they knew how to make. There was just no way for the breweries to survive, but definitely several did, and we're grateful that they did.
Yeah. I grew up in Helena, so I'm kind of familiar with the Kessler Brewery, but when I was growing up, I was
Yeah.
too young to drink beer. I may or may not have had a few glasses here and there before I turned legal age, but I won't expand on that. But the Kessler Brewery played obviously a big role in Helena and in Montana brewing as well.
It did.
Talk a little bit about the Kessler Brewery and the history of that.
Kessler Brewery had there's I guess there's two phases of that Kessler Brewery. There was a version of it that sort of rose up from the ashes in the 1980s that lasted a little long while, and that was probably the one that's the closest related to all of our breweries today. But the original Kessler Brewery was a substantial force, and there's even remnants of that building I think still today that is in that Helena area. But they were able to produce a lot of beer and a lot of advertising from early on. I think Helena's one of Helena's first breweries to exist. But they had a neat, they're the ones that I relate back to some of our current brewing laws that might seem a little quirky to some of our visitors. And one of those was not being able to store your beer exactly where it was made. And there's a couple of photographs there in the book that show off a little side building that once the beer was made or put in barrels before it was being carted off, often on horse carts, it would get stored in this little small building, and there'd be a little tunnel underground. It had to be like 50 feet away from the brewing process. So it was. I looked at Kessler as one of those breweries that had to kind of navigate some quirky early alcohol laws that Montana had and still has it today in some degree. So I like them. I like their story. I just think that it again showed ingenuity and creativity for how these breweries can do well. But again, all of the breweries, if you look at almost all of them, there's some sort of it's from immigrants that were coming from various countries that brought with them literally centuries of brewing knowledge passed down family to family. And when they got here to Montana, for either starting a ranch agriculturally or working mines or mining claims, they brought a wealth of knowledge and recipes and passion for beer.
Another interesting thing I thought about the Kessler Brewery Company was, as we talk about marketing and advertising, they had a calendar that they distributed, and it kind of evolved over time, and that was really interesting. And I don't know, maybe if I don't know, people usually use their phones for their calendars now, but these days, some of the things they said on the calendar and some of the pictures they had were probably kind of considered risque for the time, and I don't know if you could get away with that today.
Certainly, absolutely. Those images there for the Kessler calendar were stunning, in not just a really interesting way for what you're describing there. But yes, to be able to have basically early pinup models, as you say, if we think back of the Marilyn Monroe type time, scantily clad women, and that's something that has been used in advertising in lots of different ways, and it certainly was by Kessler. But it's very large. When I was photographing and scanning these images in, I mean, these were very sizable posters with the calendar, but they were also became sort of keepsakes. You think of a modern, calendars today are all digital, they're on our phone, but even if you do have a paper calendar at home, often it's thrown once the year is gone. It's thrown. But something like what Kessler was doing became something that people kept, stored away. It was artwork. It was beautiful artwork. It was handcrafted in a lot of ways. These were original hand paintings that were copied into it. But those just shows that how much times have changed when you look at things like that. There's a couple of other key images in the book here that even just looked at some of that tackled with some of the more difficult topics like segregation and things like that. And breweries were not immune to that. Yes, they were community minded gathering location, but they were not immune to what was going on in the world at that time. And that stretches back. There's great images and references to what the world was going through in World War II, at least post prohibition, that these things were considered and issues back then. So yeah, it is fun to flip through and see what people were doing, what they were getting away with, and how they marketed beer. And it would be interesting to see what could pass these days. I don't know if the Kessler Brewing calendar could work for 2023.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, Ryan, I know that you probably can't mention brewing history in Montana without bringing up Butte, and that beer and Butte just kind of seems synonymous, especially back in the late 1800s, early 1900s.
Mhm.
When you had the mining industry and all the immigrants coming to Butte, so they had all kinds of. They had Irish, they had German, they had just all kinds of people, and they all had kind of their own specialty beers that they brewed there, right?
They did. They did. It was very much one of the things that Butte did that I have seen now traveling around the country today is the way that these neighborhood breweries would operate. That was we think of a brewery per town, but then when you get into some of the places, even today, you could point to a place like Portland, but definitely like Butte was an example of this of neighborhood breweries where people of different ethnicities from different countries would have a more their own style of beer or lager. But Butte, maybe literally or figuratively, was at the center of Montana's beer history.
Mhm.
They had, I think, the famous slogan of I think it was Centennial. It was a million glasses a day that they were claimed to have produced or people would consume. But Butte also had a really neat row of tap rooms. Each little brewery would have their brewing space, but then there would be its corresponding tap room, and you could see there's some images of like this brewery, then a bar, and then this other brewery, and you'd be lined up there. One of my favorite images from the book is right post prohibition. There's a gentleman like almost on one knee, and he's about to tap a keg, and I believe the story of that image is probably the first keg or a barrel of beer that was tapped once prohibition was repealed, and that happened in Butte. Almost no better fitting place to welcome back alcohol into the state than in Butte. But it's a fun town. Butte's current brewing scene is one story steeped in history,
Mhm.
with the Butte Brewing Company back in operation as a brand. That's a great place to visit. Quarry Brewing, obviously paying homage to the rich mining history that the town has had, and Quarry was the first to be in Butte after decades and decades of no brewery. So it's one of those places that you got to go explore, both for its history and what they've got going on today.
All right. Well, I know there's much more in the book, which is called Brewing in Montana. And how can people get a copy of the book?
Yeah.
How's it available?
It's going to be available in nearly all your favorite bookstores.
Okay.
So the publisher has just been a great partner in that. They're going to get it in a lot of these local bookstores. It would be available online as well for any of your favorite online retailers. But of course, if your local bookstore doesn't have it, you can ask for it. It's from Arcadia Publishing, so they're going to make it available. It should be out by October 3rd, so just
Okay.
around the corner,
Mhm.
just in time for Oktoberfest
Okay.
season and good fall drinking. And yeah, it'll be around.
Great. Ryan, do you have any other beer related literary projects in the works or?
Oh goodness. Well, I can say I'm certainly still doing the research glass by glass.
Sure.
Yeah, there. I would like to honestly update and create another book that just talks about where we're at today.
Mhm.
I'm always my other side project has been I am the creator of the Montana Brewery Passport.
Okay.
So just keeping that one updated year after year is a project in and of itself. So getting that exploring, but I'll probably do a couple more beer projects here and there that continue to showcase what we are as a state, the fact that we're number 2 in the country for barley production, that we have the second largest malting facility in the world in Great Falls. So when we have incredible water and we have a great place to explore, so getting to the breweries is going to be half the adventure. So nothing definitive yet, but I'll keep doing my darndest to enjoy all these great beers, and the stories will certainly come from that.
And enjoying those great beers throughout Montana, you're supporting Montana farmers, so it's win-win for everybody.
It certainly is. It certainly is.
You've been listening to a conversation with Missoula author Ryan Newhouse, whose new book, Brewing in Montana, details the history of beer in the Treasure State. It's available through Arcadia Publishing starting October 3rd and will also be in Montana bookstores. A special thanks also to Black Eagle Brewing Company and Black Eagle. I hope you enjoy the podcast and invite you to offer feedback and guest suggestions and rate the podcast wherever you get your podcasts. And you can also follow McGonigal's Chronicles through Facebook and Twitter. I'll be back soon with another guest with a Montana connection. Until then, for McGonigal's Chronicles, I'm Tim McGonigal.